Yeah, your world is super cool. And hey, I like your main character. That villain you got ain't half bad either. The only thing is, there's a living, breathing world you've created. Our audience needs to see that in action. So let's populate our fantasy worlds. I'm author DC Fergerson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. Before we get started, let me talk to all you authors out there. Are you just getting started? Do you need to build a newsletter subscription and grow your fan base? Well, Art of the Arcane is offering managed promotion services through BookFunnel. You get a membership and management of your newsletter to build out your subscribers, and all you need to do is stay in touch with them. There's a link in the description box down below. Check it out. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how this works, let's first talk about everything this topic is not. Basically, what doesn't count and what does a bad job of this whole thing look like? Well, the first thing to understand is that we're not talking about allies. It's very easy to create an ally for our hero and then simply say that they're representative of the culture of our world. That's easy mode, and it's a terrible idea. Another problem is the cardboard cutout society. Basically a sea of varied races, abnormalities, or freaks that surround the hero or their allies, but they serve no other purpose than, hey, look at this kind of moments, or a character for the hero to bounce off of. Like, do you remember this alien from Total Recall? Come on, you and I both know you know who she is. She's the one with the 3 boobs. Do you remember anything else about this character? No, of course not, because this is the alien with 3 boobs from Total Recall. That's what a cardboard cutout looks like. Can you think of anything that egregiously breaks both the ally and the cardboard cutout rule? Perhaps maybe a certain trilogy that we've incessantly examined on this channel? Well, if you guessed Star Wars and the Mos Eisley Cantina scene, then you get a cookie, young grasshopper. The reason this scene is so problematic from a writing perspective is because of its abject laziness. There are some 30 races in this bar, and we know nothing about any of them. They all talk in alien languages, keep to themselves, and are basically window dressing. Now, especially in a universe of countless worlds like Star Trek, that's not a crime of itself. You'd expect a major travel hub to have a wide variety of alien races in it. The real offense comes in the form of their treatment. Every one of these aliens could be humans, because there's nothing that any of them are doing that makes them special. Basically, they're aliens because this is a sci-fi film and that's what you put in there. And then we meet Han Solo, a representative of this hive of scum and villainy. In the span of 5 minutes in this bar, Han Solo gets into a lethal gunfight, and in the same bar, Obi-Wan takes a dude's arm off with a lightsaber before a fight can ensue over some stranger not liking Luke's face. So, like, the bar owner, he's just like cool with this. The patrolling stormtroopers around town, they don't have an issue with a den of armed smugglers that kill without regard in a bar that enables them to do so. There's no local law on Tatooine. What about Imperial law? There's stormtroopers everywhere. So trying to analyze this scene with critical thinking or logic actually raises more questions than it answers. The short version is, this whole scene is designed to make our characters look cool, the aliens are set dressing, and realism is chucked right out the window. These are the kind of things that we're trying to avoid, because if we want our world to feel populated by people that came from our world, they actually need to be a representative of that culture. So, let's explore. First and foremost, the important step that we take as storytellers is to treat every person in our world with the same level of care that went into crafting the world to begin with. We accomplish that by having an angle or a story for every single character that comes into a scene. But DC, I can't create a backstory for 150 people in my story, that's madness. Well, guy who talks to your monitor, that's not exactly what I'm advocating for. When I say they each should have a story, what I mean by that is that they should give some thought to this side character. What do we want them to be in this scene? What kind of a day are they having? How do they present themselves to the characters? And why is that important? Especially if they're from a fantasy race, are they representative of that race? If they're different, why are they different? How does this affect their disposition? You can literally ask yourself these questions in a matter of seconds as your pen is hitting the paper. Since we're not invested in this character, we're kind of just tuning dials to have them be how we want them to be in this scene. Doing this serves a ton of bonuses to us, such as maintaining consistency and tone with their conversational parts, and it also gives us narrative options to show don't tell. Why waste time explaining everything that there is to know about trolls on your world when you can say something like, "The troll was oddly friendly and talkative, so our hero didn't want to waste that kind of opportunity." That little line is driving your narrative further, but it's also telling our audience, when you see a troll, expect them to be unfriendly and quiet. See, it doesn't matter whether your extras in the background are having a bad day and they're not normally like this, or they're super kind even though our heroes didn't do anything to deserve it. The point is that they are right here, right now, in this scene. How we portray that and what we narrate about that, how it bounces off of our main characters, that says everything our audience needs to know. Take, for example, this guy here in Johnny Mnemonic. He's the agent for bodyguards in town. When our supporting character Jane comes into the bar, she makes a line for him and immediately puts one of his personal bodyguards down. This is her idea of a job interview. Unaffected by her sudden attack, this guy sits back, he's relaxed, and he proceeds to talk to her while one of his bodyguards is in an arm lock. Without explaining to the audience, he tells Jane to hold out her arm. Sure enough, she holds out her arm, and he has her keep it there until tremors set in. What does this scene tell us about the world and the larger world outside this bar? Well, a lot of people must need bodyguards if there's some VIP in a club that's hiring them. His own bodyguards, a man and a woman, are both dressed to the same, down to their makeup, appreciating fashion regardless of gender. Jane has cybernetic augmentations to make her a better bodyguard, but her tremors indicate she had bad work done that messed with her nervous system. That is a ton of world building for just one guy in just one scene. This is all about context. We want these random touch-and-go extra characters that populate the world to do some heavy lifting with our world building every time they show up. But we want to get that world building done through dialogue and narration, and as we characterize this person, we incidentally paint our world to the audience. It's a subtle, sneaky devil we're playing with, but it does loads to enhance your story. Now, where is a good place to stick characters like these? Well, I am so glad you asked. Contained stories that focus on the heroes and little else can make the world feel narrow and confined. To broaden your story with the appearance of a wider world, there is no better place than a bar or a restaurant. Whether it's 10 Forward or the Inn of the Last Home, everyone needs to eat eventually, and what better place than a public setting in the middle of your world? I can tell you that I not only use this advice, but I think it's spectacular. Know that if you are reading one of my books and a chapter features one of my characters walking into a bar, I'm having an absolute blast. It is so much fun to characterize these wild, one-off characters and try to make them memorable. If there's one great takeaway I hope you get from this, it's that great protagonists are what sells your story. Great extras are what sell your world building. So, let's go back to that scene in the Mos Eisley Cantina again, because it had the right idea, the right place and time in the story, and the right setting. Its only handicap was the execution. See, Luke and Obi-Wan just happen to meet Han Solo. Most of the introductions happen off-screen. The real meat of this scene is the idea of Luke and Obi-Wan sitting down, talking to several patrons, a fish out of water kind of scene. Obi-Wan can show his age and wisdom here when Luke says something to the effect of, "Well, let's ask that guy." And Obi-Wan replies, "No, Luke, he's a Quellish. They're known to start fights and they don't like our kind." Then Luke gets into it with him later, and now it makes sense why he was so quick to violence and why Obi-Wan had to put him down so hard and fast. You see what we're doing here? By spending a few extra moments stopping to smell the roses, as it were, we're building up the lore of our world and also making a cohesive narrative. Otherwise, this pair getting provoked at the very sight of Luke in a bar, reaching for blasters, and Obi-Wan cutting off an arm, all seems a bit cartoonish and an overreaction, which it did. I can tell you that I pay special care to this myself. For example, there's a scene in Project Phoenix where our protagonist goes to a morgue, and the coroner is a dwarf. As they're chatting, he complains of the state of dwarven affairs in Berlin and how they're treated like second-class citizens. In another scene, this time in a bar, our hero is looking for a contact and orders a drink. She makes small talk with the ferry waitress that flies over to the bar. I love this scene in the book, because a spare moment to flesh out the world and make this fairy a working-class waitress in an underground bar in Berlin did more for me in 2 pages than my narration could have done justice in 5. The series True Blood did a great job with this too, in the early episodes. When naive country girl Sookie Stackhouse wanders into a vampire bar in the big city, she finds the owner of the club has set himself up like a king, complete with his throne. Your eyes are drawn to that as an audience member, but what really puts you in this world are the patrons, again, in this bar setting, where there are humans in this club. They're dressing provocatively in the hope of drawing the attention of the vampires here. This is a gigantic tell about the darker, more risque side of vampires revealing themselves to the world. It tells you about how some humans have reacted, lets you see the interaction between humans and vampires on a personal level, and it does so through interaction, not explaining it to you. The short version of all of this is to never underestimate the power of a bar or a restaurant. Whether it's the mess hall on a cramped spaceship, or a gigantic dinner hall, or even the high school cafeteria in a school full of wizards, these public events are where you can do some serious world building and just have fun with your world's citizens. There is a side benefit I wanted to touch on for a moment, and that's cheap feels. If you're going the extra mile to characterize these folks, we may as well extract every last ounce of storytelling and world-building juice out of them, right? Well, what better way than with the emotion we've put into them? Come on, you know what I'm talking about. This scene right here has been done literally dozens of times in films for cheap feels. We can do even better than that. I mean, sure, defenseless babies are one thing, but someone we know? Come on. The hero just met this elf woman a minute ago, and she seemed really nice. Now the bad guy has a sword to her throat? What a monster. Characterization of your extras, your filler population, means we can get memorable characters and scenes out of a scant few pages where we get to know them. I can tell you that this dude that got his arm cut off, as many of you already know, is named Ponda Baba. Star Wars fans remember this because for many of us, it's the first time we saw a lightsaber in action. In that bar scene from Project Phoenix I mentioned earlier, our protagonist's contact is a troll weapons dealer. His English is terrible, and he's quite taken with our hero. Despite only appearing in 2 or 3 chapters across 3 different books, I get messages all the time about how excited they got when he showed up again. It's hilarious that such a bit character in the series can be so memorable, but that goes to show you what a well-characterized extra can do. This is especially great if you're trying to evoke emotion. We're going to talk a lot about that in next week's episode, but the more characterized one of these extras are, the more emotion you can get from your readers, whether it be because they're in danger, or they're upset, or killed, whatever it is. If you want to tug at heartstrings, there are plenty of ways to do this. Take this advice and run with it. Never let any person in your tales go to waste. Whether it's a waitress or a random guy on the street, if they're interacting with your character, they are touching your story. They should feel as real and connected to your world as the hero, not a plot device to move the scene along. There is no substitute for populating your world with real people. No plot device or measure of narration is ever going to capture the experience of how your world feels than when it's coming out of someone's mouth. And as we'll see next week, it is a key to writing and evoking emotion in our audience. Once again, I want to thank everybody so much for all the donations and assistance. We are at 50% of getting this wonderful lady a service dog. Her name is Liana, and she is on the spectrum, and we're working with the Boston-based Needs organization. This wonderful person is my little girl, and if you'd like to help, there's a link in the comments below. Also, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. The link is also in the comments, and you're going to get Cora Blake, Arcane Agent, totally free. You'll get cool news about what I'm working on, both in books and here on the channel, and it comes loaded with cool authors and promotions for fantasy and sci-fi. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, I'm DC Fergerson. Now have fun and get crafting.